Look, if you want to know what a property is actually worth, you absolutely cannot rely on the seller's numbers. It's a trap. Mastering your own financial architecture is literally the only way to determine an asset's true economic viability. You have to build the model yourself. Think of the seller's trailing 12-month statement, the T12, as the past. It's history. Your pro forma, that's your roadmap for the future. Stick with me to the very end of this explainer because we're going to build a totally bulletproof pro forma to expose exactly what a property is worth today, right now. All right, Chapter 1, Beyond the Seller's T12. So, a property's current valuation and its future returns are entirely tied to its net operating income. But to find that real number, we have to throw out the simple napkin math. A true pro forma is dynamic. It's a defensive model. You have to aggressively account for market realities, complex lease structures, and those inevitable operational frictions. You know, we aren't just painting a rosy picture here, we're building a financial fortress. Moving on to Chapter 2, Calculating Effective Gross Income. Okay, before we even peek at expenses, we've got to lock in our top-line revenue. Your effective gross income, or EGI, equals PGI minus V&C plus OI. This formula right here is your main tool for calculating potential cash flow while baking in those structural inefficiencies. So let's break down what this alphabet soup actually means. First up is PGI, which stands for potential gross income. Think of this as the absolute maximum revenue the property could generate if it were 100% occupied and literally every single tenant paid full market rent. It includes your scheduled base rent, meaning the actual rent locked in by existing leases, plus your speculative rent. That's the market rate rent you're assigning to any currently vacant spaces. But let's be real, no property operates at perfect capacity forever. There are always frictions that drag down that PGI. You've got physical vacancy, which are your unleased units, economic vacancy, like model units or staff apartments, and of course collection loss, basically bad debt. So here's the underwriter's golden rule. Never ever model 0% vacancy. No way. You've got to use a structural floor, usually around 5%, just to account for natural tenant turnover. All right, once we subtract those losses, we add back OI, or other income. And uncovering these extra revenue streams, man, it can massively boost an asset's yield. In multifamily properties, we're talking about parking fees, RUBS, that's ratio utility reimbursement systems, and yeah, even pet rent for Fido. For commercial spaces, it's common area maintenance reimbursements and signage rights. Finding these hidden pockets of cash is exactly how great investors totally supercharge their top line. Which brings us to Chapter 3, Projecting Market Rent Growth. Listen closely to this one. Projecting a perpetual steady 5% annual rent increase across your entire hold period is a really dangerous macroeconomic illusion. If you check the local municipal planning records and see a massive wave of new competitive inventory delivering in years 2 and 3, you are going to face some fierce competition. During those periods, your rent growth assumptions absolutely must flatten out or maybe even contract. If you just draw a straight 5% line right through a massive supply dump, your pro forma is going to collapse under reality. Next up, you have to analyze loss to lease. Basically, this is the gap between your current in-place rent and the prevailing market rent. Say market rents have just surged overnight, but your tenants, well, they're locked into long-term leases for the next 3 years. You're going to experience a massive time lag before you can actually capture those rent bumps. You simply cannot model that income until those leases actually expire. Finally, when it comes to rent growth, we have to look at inflation correlation. You absolutely have to match your rent growth assumptions to your expense growth assumptions. It's crucial. If inflation means your expenses are compounding at 3% a year, but you're only modeling 2% rent growth, your profit margins are just going to steadily erode year after year. All right, the climax, Chapter 4, Normalizing Operating Expenses. So we've got our revenue locked in. Now we have to survive the seller's trap. See, sellers will literally always present this highly optimized expense profile just to maximize their asking price. We have to step in and fiercely normalize those line items. Let's map out the seller's myth versus the underwriter's reality for the 4 core expense pillars. This is how you protect your downside. First up, real estate taxes. The seller's trap here is showing you their historical pre-sale tax bill, but you've got to underwrite for the reset effect. When you buy that property, the transaction triggers a reassessment. You have to calculate your future tax liability based on your brand new purchase price and the local millage rate. Basically, entirely ignore what the seller used to pay. Second, property insurance.
The seller is probably going to try and pass off some legacy, grandfathered master policy rates. Do not fall for this. We are in the middle of severe market hardening right now, and insurance rates have spiked globally. You must secure a fresh, localized broker quote during your due diligence instead of just leaning on their old historical figures.
Third on the list, utilities. Now, the trap here is the seller showing you utility costs from, say, one historically mild winter, or maybe they conveniently ignore a few structural leaks. You need baseline modeling. You really have to analyze multiple years of consumption data to build in buffers for extreme weather and those absolutely inevitable rate hikes from local utility providers. And fourth, management fees. Oh, a classic seller trick is showing a 0% fee because they quote-unquote self-manage. Let's debunk this right now. Even if you plan to plunge the toilets yourself, your model has to account for the market rate value of labor. Depending on the size of the asset, you must bake in a 3 to 10% management fee. Always, no exceptions. So by strictly auditing your top-line revenue potential, applying those nice conservative growth rates, and fiercely normalizing your operating expenses, we arrive right here. You take your highly defensible effective gross income, and you subtract your normalized operating expenses. And bam! That leaves you with your net operating income, or NOI. This single, totally unvarnished number is the absolute ultimate truth of your property's financial health. It is literally the bedrock of all commercial property valuation. So here is the critical question you have to answer right now. How does this exact NOI figure dictate the leverage a commercial lender will actually give you? You cannot close a deal until you know this math.